test. Good evening and welcome to our Exodus study. I'm very excited, very glad to have you in the room. And as we're studying today, we're in Exodus chapter 7. And Exodus chapter 7 is interesting because it begins the 7 plagues. And as we begin the 7 plagues, I want us to sit in this because I think a lot of times this is one of the very texts of the Bible that when people get here, they ask the question, how could God, a loving God, a kind God, a forgiving God, a patient God, the God with whom we have such deep affection, how could that God cause so much pain? How could that God be responsible for so much chaos that would beset Egypt? How could that God be responsible for all of these things? And I want us to open this text wanting to answer that question. Because if we want the answer to the question, I think we'll find it right here in this chapter. But what I want us to be aware of is that a lot of times we spend a lot of time wondering how could God, and when the answer knocks on our door, we don't want the answer. We just want to be mad. And so today I want to invite you to open your heart, open your mind, open your understanding as we dive, and delve here. And let's gain some understanding. So Exodus 7, I'm going to read from the New Living Translation. And as I read from the New Living Translation, we're going to find it reads this way. It says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Pay close attention to this, and I will make you seem like God to Pharaoh. And your brother Aaron will be your prophet.'" Now, I want you to see this. In the last couple of encounters that Moses has had with Pharaoh, Pharaoh asked the question, he said, "I don't know Yahweh. I don't know your God." In the English, it would translate, "I don't know Jehovah. Who is Jehovah, and how dare he step to me?" And so because Pharaoh is used to dealing with gods that he can see, because he's used to dealing with gods and deities that he's familiar with, even his society equates him to being a god. And since his society equates him to being a god, everything that he has equated with God has been tangible. So what God does, he says, "All right, Moses, I'm going to send you. And because I'm going to send you and you're going to be my representative. I'm going to make you seem like God to him because he needs something he can see so that he can understand my power." And I want to pause there. I want to sit there for a second because I think one of our issues in today's society is that we need something to see. And a lot of times we don't equate power unless we can see it, feel it, or taste it. And so although God is fixed on allowing Pharaoh to experience the fullness of his power, I want to challenge us because God doesn't always come down in flesh for us. Sometimes our faith demands that we trust that he is who he says he is. And so as we sit here in today's text, I want us to pay close attention to the fact that God sends Moses as a representative of him, and that Aaron would be his prophet. It kind of creates this chain where we have God in heaven, we have Moses who speaks for God, and then Aaron who speaks for Moses. And it creates this hierarchy of sorts, also that Pharaoh may believe. Next verse. And then it says, "Tell Aaron everything I command to you. And Aaron must command Pharaoh to let the people of Israel leave his country." Let's keep going. "But I will make Pharaoh's heart stubborn so I can multiply my miraculous signs and wonders in the land of Egypt." Watch that. He says, I want to multiply my signs and my miraculous plans in the land of Egypt. Egypt is sinful. Egypt is polytheistic, almost pantheistic, if you want to think for a second. But God is God really wants them to see his power in Egypt. They're used to seeing signs and wonders. They're not foreign to that. They're used to having a pantheon of gods. But God says, I want to show up in this place. If you remember, if you ever spent some time in Sunday school, there was a city that Paul walks up on, and they've got this erection to all these different gods. They've got, this God has a statue, this God has a statue, God has a statue. And they were so concerned with offending the gods that they had assigned to the unknown God. And so Paul takes that opportunity to introduce them to the God, the name that is above all names, and the God who is above all gods. And he introduces them to our God, our Christ, our Savior. God himself, here at the beginning of the nation of Israel, takes this opportunity and says, I'm not just focused on Israel. Israel is my firstborn. Israel is my love, but I love all men. And so if I've got to bring them out of Israel, I want to make sure that if anybody would see my works and wonders around this family, that they would get to come into the fold as well. Now that whispers to us that God has always been about the big game from the beginning. There are a lot of people, a lot of scholars who believe that God only cares about Israel. As a matter of fact, I got a lot of friends, and don't tell them that I'm saying this, I got a lot of friends who believe that it's all about Israel. It's all about Israel, but Israel was just the tool. Israel still is just the tool so that all men would be brought into the knowledge of God. And so I want to say that to somebody who feels like they don't belong, or that they're not good enough, or that they could never be accepted, or that they could never be saved, or they could never have a Christ walk. I've got a buddy who I led to Christ some years ago who does not believe in Christ. And he overheard his friend say, he said, I don't think I'm good enough for Jesus. I don't think I'm clean enough. I don't think my lifestyle will ever permit me to have a relationship with Jesus. And so I asked my friend, I said, so did you take that opportunity? He said, I don't remember. And I wonder how many people sit at home at night and they have that deep down on the inside of them, I would never be good enough or whole enough or whatever enough to have a relationship with Christ. But from the beginning of this entire plan, God cared about everybody. Let's keep moving. He says, even then, Pharaoh will refuse to listen to you, and so I will bring down my fist on Egypt. And then I will rescue my forces, my people, the Israelites, from the land of Egypt with great acts of judgment. He says, even then, I'm going to bring down my fist on Egypt. And before we even begin to do a little bit of study, I want you to see this, that God is bringing down his people. He desires to save Egypt, but the way that he's doing it is through suffering. Watch that again. He's going to deliver the Israelites. Remember, we talked about that last week, how the Israelites, it was getting worse for them. That they went and asked Pharaoh to let them go, and Pharaoh made it worse. They took away their straw from their bricks. He desires to bring out the Israelites to fulfill a promise. He wants to save the Egyptians who will listen. But even though he wants to deliver both groups, the way he's going to do it is through suffering. And if we can pause, I thought about this today. I said, why would a God who wants to save people through suffering? That doesn't make sense. Because if I was expecting someone to be saved, I would think that this knight in shining armor would come in and he would just rescue them all and say, oh, I love you, and blow kisses to them and everything would be fine. But there has to be something to be saved from. And I think a lot of us, when we feel like we're self-sufficient, we don't depend on anybody. Nevertheless, God, we don't depend on anybody. If I have enough money, I don't need your help. If I have enough muscle, I don't need your assistance. I'm not going to call you. If I have enough, whatever it is, if I have enough food, I'm not going to call and ask for a handout. It is when I'm at the end of my rope that I have to go and seek some help out, that I have to go look for something to meet my need. And so God is sitting here thinking, he's saying, I am that I am. I am the Almighty One. I am the creator of time. I made power. Light was my invention. Creation was an idea and a concept that I came up with. But they don't know that because I gave them likeness after me. And since they don't know that, and I gave them likeness after me, I've got to make them know that they need me. So I've got to take some things away. I've got to make some stuff hurt. I've got to make some stuff uncomfortable. And so that's what he does. And so he says, Pharaoh's not going to listen. And that's my job. I'm going to make sure he doesn't listen. And I'm going to make sure that Egypt hurts. And then I'll be able to come in and rescue them. And I want to suggest to somebody maybe at home that it's in those dark hours that you don't feel like prayer is working, that God is working it. It's in those deep hours when you feel like he's forgotten, that he's reordering things so that he can come in and he can save, he can protect, he can show up and show out. It's cute when you get the testimony and you didn't have to sweat for it. But we appreciate it when we get the victory and we can and he's brought it out. That didn't even make sense. It's wonderful when we get the victory and God has provided in a way that we can't take credit for. Okay, let's keep moving. Verse 5. He says, when I raise my powerful hand and bring out the Israelites, the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord commanded them. Moses was 80 years old. Aaron was 83 years old, and they made their demands to Pharaoh. Just a side note here. When you're studying your Bible on your own, and the Bible randomly inserts an age, something amazing is about to happen. Every time I'm reading my Bible and the Lord, there's like this dialogue, and then all of a sudden it says so-and-so was 80 years old. Something amazing is about to happen because God is about to show you that I marked this in their memory of how old I was or how old they were when this happened because I'm about to do something amazing. So Moses is 80, his older brother is 83, and they went and made demands to Pharaoh. Verse 8. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, Pharaoh will demand, show me a miracle. When he does this, say to Aaron, take your staff and throw it down in front of Pharaoh, and it will become a serpent. Go ahead. So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did what the Lord commanded them. Aaron threw down his staff before Pharaoh and his officials, and it became a serpent. Now this is where it gets hairy. We saw this happen the first time Moses was before God, and God gave him this long disclosure about how I'm going to do it. And you remember he threw his rod down, it became a serpent. He stuck his hand in his shirt, it became leprous. God shows him all of these amazing feats. He turns water into blood. God does these things through Moses. Now here's what's interesting. In verse 10, the word serpent is a different word than we see in the previous chapters in this book. Now, it is still a word that we see for reptile, but it is translated different. The word we see here, serpent, when Moses is throwing the rod, is surely a snake. When we see this word is conjugated and is often translated crocodile. Why is that deep? Why is that interesting? Because the crocodile or the alligator was the national animal of Egypt. And it was the national animal of Egypt. Like in America, the bald eagle is our national animal. When you look at Russia, they are the bear. When you look at various countries, the crocodile was their national animal. And so when he takes this, in this instant, when Aaron throws down his rod, in this particular instant, it turns into what we would know as a crocodile. Now, why is this crazy? Because he throws down his staff before the officials, it becomes that reptile. When it lays down, it becomes that reptile. They've seen shows before. They've seen amazing things before, but then the text continues. It continues and it says this, Pharaoh called on his own wise men. And sorcerers and the Egyptian magicians did the same with their magic. They threw down their staffs, which also became serpents. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. Pharaoh's heart, however, remained hard. Now, if it was a snake, it's equally as impressive. It's equally as impressive, but I want you to see this. They throw it down, it looks like a crocodile, looks like your nation's animal. And you go and you replicate it because that's our nation's animal. We do magic, we do sorcery. My crocodile just ate yours. Why is that deep? Because God is answering the question that Pharaoh asked, who is Yahweh? And he responds with, I am. And so everything that is going to happen for the next 5 chapters is bent on answering the question, I am. So not only does a snake eat a snake, but this crocodile eats their crocodile, saying that you think your country is stronger. You think your empire is stronger. You think that you have all the power and all the understanding, but I'm here to present to you, to show you that even though you can replicate through magic what I can do through power, you'll never have more power than I. Now, you remember we started this study in about chapter 5, and I took you to Psalm 82, and I told you about the counsel of the God, the Elohim. I want you to remember that those spirits have the ability to do things just as they have the ability to do now. But this is still God answering the question of who is I am that I am. And so he's showing that he has this dominance. And whether Pharaoh says in arrogance or in ignorance, who is he? He's getting a first-class lesson on who he is. Now, this is not the beginning of the plagues. In just a few verses, we're going to start the beginning of the plagues. But what I want you to also notice here is that Pharaoh's heart, even though the show is amazing, even though the show should turn your mind, even though the show should be like, maybe I need to listen to this guy, his heart stays hard. And I think I said it to you last week, but I like the way the New Living Translation says it. It says he still refused to listen. And I want to look at that multidimensionally, because how many of us have heard the voice of God audibly, or something nudged our spirit, but that's not what I wanted to do. That's not the direction I wanted to go. And so God says, go left, but I don't like left turns. Yeah, I'm being facetious, but I don't like left turns. I don't want to go left. Left turns are not my thing. And I want you to see this. The Lord, he remains, his heart remains hard, but the harder his heart gets, the harder the judgment gets. And I want to submit something to you, that the longer you resist God, whether it is through salvation or it's through direction, your heart might get harder, but the issues you're dealing with in life get more difficult. And I know a lot of times, and you may get mad at me, but a lot of times we want to be like, oh, that devil, the devil, the devil, the devil, but sometimes it's between me and God. Because every now and then, yeah, the devil is doing things, but if you're not listening to the directions of God, this is this is a prime picture of what we would call in the theological realm the prohibitive will of God. Okay, let's talk for just a second. This is exactly what we would call the prohibitive will of God. There are 4 types of will of God. Of course, we are most familiar with the providential will of God. It's when we do what God says, we get the best blessing. A lot of us like to hang out in what we call the permissive will of God. That is where we ask God to do something. It's not his favorite thing, but he's not going to stop you from doing it. It doesn't come with showers of blessing, but it doesn't come with a whole lot of pushback either. There is also what we call the prohibitive will of God. And that's where you've been pushing against God, pushing against God, pushing against God, pushing against God. And the more you push, it seems like you're succeeding. And as you feel like you're succeeding, but you're still getting a whole bunch of pushback. It seems like, okay, I walked away, I said no, and for a few days it's okay. And now here comes the judgment of God again. Because God wanted you to go left. Let my people go. You don't listen, okay, something else is coming. And so you push, your heart is hardened. And let me help you today, because for a lot of us, that doesn't look like us being Pharaoh. For some of us, that is, stay on that job. Your blessing is on that job in year 3. So you quit. And when you quit, you can't find a new job. And you're praying, and now you're trying to tithe, but you're supposed to stay at that job. because your blessing was at that job in year 3. And you still have the favor of that boss. You could go back, but you don't want to be there. And so now you've quit your job, and now you're getting foreclosed on because the blessing was at that job in year 3. And now all the doors and all the other jobs that you thought would be available when you left, because everybody was promising you those doors, are closed, because he'll close a door that no man can open. And he'll open a door that no man can shut. That's Revelation. And so the prohibitive will of God looks like this, that God will let you defy him, but not without his judgment. And I think a lot of us think that how could a good God, how could a loving God, how could a patient God allow this to happen? And this is one way that we can see that happen in our lives. Let's keep moving. Let's keep moving, because I'm about to lose my crowd. In verse 15. He says, so go to Pharaoh in the morning. As he goes down to the river, stand on the bank of the Nile and meet him there. Be sure to take along the staff that turned into a snake. Now let's pause, because this too gets interesting. Pharaoh was seen as Horus, the god Horus. The god Horus was seen as the son of the god Hamath. The god Hamath was seen as the god Omen-Ra. Omen-Ra was the god of the sun. And so when the Egyptian people worshiped the sun, they worshiped Omen-Ra, Horus, and his daddy. They worshiped those 3 gods. And so when they would show out, he would bathe there in the water. And as he would bathe there in the water, the people saw it as a form of worship. So early in the morning, Pharaoh had a routine that he would go down to the Nile and he would bathe. And when he would bathe there, at this time of the year, it's believed that this was around July, August, it was the greatest crops. And so the people attributed that to Osiris and Pharaoh because Pharaoh was there. But they also believed that the Nile was the bloodstream of Osiris. So all this nasty other god stuff going on. And so God tells him, you go down at this time while they think they're worshiping these other gods. I want you to see this, because if you read this and you don't know this history, you'll be like, oh, he just went down there, he was taking a bath, it's not anything important. So he goes down there at this particular time because there's a lot of other godly worship happening down at the river. He takes his snake, verse 16. He says, then announce to him that the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, sent me to tell you, let my people go, so that they can worship me in the wilderness. And until now, you've refused to listen to him. Verse 17. So this is what the Lord says. I will show you that I am the Lord. Look, I will strike the water of the Nile with this staff in my hand, and the river will turn to blood. Now, this is the first of the 10 plagues of the Exodus. We're about to walk into that. And I want you to notice we've got 10 plagues, but the first 9 are grouped into 3 groups. The first group would be the plagues of luxury. The Nile was not the only water source in Egypt. It was the convenient water source. It was the water source that the wealthy went to. It was the water source that people went to because it ran through the middle of everything. It was convenient. People bathed there because it was convenient. There were other well springs. There were other rivers. There were all types of things, but the Nile was convenient. And so God says, he says, I'm going to show you who I am, verse 18, and I'm going to attack what's convenient for you. He says, the fish will die in it, the river will stink, the Egyptians will not be able to drink any water from the Nile. Keep going. He says, then the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron, take your staff, raise your hand over the river waters of Egypt and all its rivers, canals, ponds, and all the reservoirs. Turn all the water to blood. Everywhere in Egypt, the water will turn to blood, even the water stored in wooden bowls and stone pots. 20. So Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord commanded them. As Pharaoh and all of his officials watched, Aaron raised his staff and struck the water of the Nile. Suddenly, the whole river turned to blood. Let's keep going. The fish in the river died. The water became so foul that the Egyptians couldn't drink it. There was blood everywhere throughout the land of Egypt. 22. But again, the magicians of Egypt used their magic, and they too turned water into blood. And so Pharaoh's heart remained hard. He refused to listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had predicted. So they show up. They show up down there at the river at the appointed time that God says so. He warns him. Watch this. He warns them. Now, in this chapter, we see three things happen. The first time when they show up to turn the crocodile or the snake, however you want to think of it, the stick into the snake, he gets a warning. The Lord said, "Let us go. And if you don't let us go, this is what I'll do." And Pharaoh doesn't listen. He says, they show up this time, early in the morning, he's bathing. The Lord said, "Let us go. And if you don't let us go, I'm going to turn the water into blood." God warns them. And I think this is his picture. This is a picture you got to see, because we don't talk about sin in the church like we used to. But anytime we get ready to do something out of the will of God, God usually shows up with a really clear warning. Don't do it. Don't go. You get a stomach ache, something, your car won't start, something happens very clearly that maybe I shouldn't be going this direction. Now, again, with the prohibitive will of God, you may go. You may override the decision. You may go the opposite direction. But he says, don't go. So he shows up, he casts his rod into the water, and it turns to blood. This is so well recorded that it's not just in the Jewish and the Hebrew and the Christian Bible. This is recorded in the Epure Papyrus, which is an Egyptian history book, in chapter 10. You can look it up, I think it's spelled IPEWR, the Epure Papyrus. In chapter 10, all the water in all of Egypt turned to blood. Now, I want you to say this because you could Google this and somebody's going to say, "Oh, it was just the red tide. And there was this thing in Egypt where the water would turn red because there was clay dust." But it specifically says in the Bible account and all of the history accounts that the water turned to blood. Dirt and blood are not the same thing. They're not even close. And so although some people may say that it was red, and this is a phenomenon that would be the same, the water not only was brown or was red, but the water stunk, it was undrinkable, and all the fish died. Now here's how we say that theory doesn't work. If there's dirt in every single water source, if you go to the beach, sand is dirt. If you go to the lake, the bottom of it is dirt. If you go to the river, it's got stones and dirt at the bottom. Dirt is not going to kill a fish, but blood is not water. Blood does not have the properties to support fish. And so when their habitat goes from being oxygen to being blood, it no longer has the capacity to support the life of the fish. So all of the fish die. And it stays this way for 7 days. So all of the food in the Nile is uneatable. The water in the Nile is undrinkable. You can't bathe somewhere that is not clean. And so now the luxury, the convenience that is the Nile River is no longer usable. Let's keep moving. Let's go back to 22, I'm sorry. The magicians of Egypt used their magic to turn the water to blood. Now, I want you to see this, because when you read this literally, what happens is in a different version, it says that they go and they find some clean water. So they go out of their convenience to find some clean water. When they come back, they find the clean water and they turn it to blood. I have a question. If there's a water shortage and the water of the Nile is dirty, wouldn't the real miracle be for the magicians to turn it clean? If you're equivalent, if you're equal to this God who is making these declarations, the way to prove your providence or your power would be to clean the water. And I want to prove 2 points to you. Satan cannot create anything. He can only imitate. And so he imitates what God has told Moses to tell Aaron to do, because he cannot come up with anything new, anything fresh, or anything clean. Second thing I want you to see is Satan also cannot do anything good, because it would have been a good thing for him to clean the water. to reverse the curse, to take back what God has already put in judgment. And then the third thing I want you to see is that Satan does not have the power to override what God has already said. I want you to see this, and this is important because in this verse, in this text, these magicians are trying to prove that they are equal to God. They're trying to prove that they have the ability to do what God can do. They want to prove that they are just as good, just as great, just as whatever. And what God is saying right here, no. You can't create because I'm creator. You can't do good because there is none good but me. And you definitely can't override me because I made you. And so I want you to see this because I think sometimes we give a lot of credence, a lot of credit to Satan. Oh, that devil. The devil just been attacking my knees today. The devil just did this. But I got to remind you that the devil can't create. He can't create. He cannot do anything good, but he definitely can't override God. And I want you to see this. If he can't override God, that means he can't override your confession. He cannot override your confession because the Bible has told you that what you have is what you say is what you'll have. And I think some of us blame the devil for what we start in the earth. Let's keep going. We're almost done. 23, Pharaoh returned to his palace and put the whole thing out of his mind. Then all the Egyptians dug along the riverbank to find drinking water, for they could not drink from the Nile. 25. What's the last verse? 7 days passed from the time the Lord struck the Nile. Let's go back to 24 real quick and we're going to finish up. The Egyptians dug along the riverbank to find drinking water. I want you to notice this as we wrap up, that the Egyptians, the people, are the ones that suffered, although it was Pharaoh's heart that was hardened. The people were not negotiating with Moses and God. The people did not seek to do anything. And from a political spot, and I'm gonna dance carefully, there are some things that we suffer at the hands of leaders who will not turn to God. There are some things that happen in society that we suffer at the hands of people who will not turn to God. That's why you have to pray for your leaders, whether you voted for them or not. That's why we have to be very careful to elect people who God is telling us to elect. And that's not always the person the party is saying is God's choice. You got to be prayerful about the people that you elect. But beyond that, I want you to say this, the people suffered. The people suffered. Pharaoh didn't suffer. The Bible says in 23 that Pharaoh went back to the house, put it out of his mind. They were finding water for Pharaoh. And so what I want you to see is that we're about to see 9 other plagues in the weeks to come. The first plague didn't touch Pharaoh's house. It didn't touch his house. You know, the people were suffering, but he wasn't a leader for the people. He didn't care about being a servant leader. Okay, the Nile is dirty. Nobody can drink water, but y'all are going to find water for me. If y'all got to go all the way to Canaan to get it, you're going to find water for me. And so I want you to see this. Sometimes suffering has the hit until it makes it to the right house. That doesn't sound good. That doesn't feel good. But sometimes it's going to get worse until it can get better because God is trying to get the attention of the right people. That's not a Band-Aid. That doesn't make us feel better. But it does explain to us why some things happen. Pray with me. God, we thank you for your word. We thank you that you breathe new life into us, God. We thank you that you invigorate us with your word. God, we thank you that we can use old stories that are thousands of years old, to help push us, to help give us insight, to help give us wisdom and stature for today. God, things may be bleak in society, but I know that you are the light of the world. And so, God, make your word a light unto our path. God, breathe in us in a brand new way. God, I pray that you would redeem our time this evening. I pray that you would keep us, help us get home safely, God. But I pray most of all that this word would permeate our hearts, our minds, and our lives. We praise you, God. We worship you in Jesus Christ's precious name. Amen.